Advantage. In this episode, we speak to Bruce Engel, the senior partner at Engel and Associates. So we learn about the criminal law industry and a lot of insights for business. Hope everybody enjoys it, and happy Thanksgiving. Well, hi, Bruce. Welcome to the podcast this week. Excited to have you on board. Maybe if you can just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the business that you're part of.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. My God, not the business I'm part of, probably the business that is within me and that I'm within. It's consumed me and that I've consumed. I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and I run a boutique criminal defense firm. We're four lawyers, two paralegals, three or four legal assistants, a couple of students. So at any given time, there's 10 of us lurking around the office. And we represent individuals and companies who run afoul of the law, people accused and actually charged of crimes, people being investigated or being contacted by the police in any capacity. We're there to help guide and navigate people through the criminal justice system. We're based out of Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. I know there's an Ontario in Southern California where you're at. I know there's a big motor speedway or a big stadium there, but we're much further northeast than that stadium is, and we're in the capital of Canada. It's the capital, but it's certainly not the biggest city, not as hustling and bustling, as active as Washington D.C. or Toronto or Montreal, but it's for me it's a perfect fit, perfect size city. I don't think any cities should be more than 1 million people. Quite frankly, I think anything over 2-3 million, when you get into 5, 6, 7 million people, that's just insanity. And it works well for us. I've done cases all over the country, although I'm licensed to practice law primarily in Ontario, but I've gone as far east as New Brunswick and as far west as British Columbia. So that's spanning both sides of the map.
That's interesting. So Ontario, yeah, they have an airport out there too, which is I used to work at an office out there. Interesting you say that about the size of the town. So I live in this town called San Clemente, which is essentially a beach town in between LA and San Diego. But so you get the benefits of having things close by, but this little community that we're absolutely loving it. I get it as far as the smaller cities are concerned.
For sure.
So, so in thinking about, a lot of the people that I have on the podcast are technology executives, and my background is consulting, and so it tends to gravitate people toward that. So there's kind of a niche that we'll be talking to. So, maybe a couple of questions are, why starting out on your own? I could imagine that the options are to go to big law firms. Like, what was your incentives creating culture, whatever it was that said, listen, I think I can go do this on my own, and I can do it better. Right?
Well, great question, because when I started out, I ended up, you article, or I guess, what do they call it in the States? You apprentice for a lawyer or a regular firm, and I articled or apprenticed for a relatively big firm that had about a dozen lawyers. I mean, relatively. There's big, huge firms in the States and even in Toronto that have like 600 or 700 people, 600 or 700 lawyers. So by Ottawa standards, relatively big firm, about a dozen lawyers or so. And I articled there, and I knew that I wanted to do criminal defense. They were not a criminal defense firm, although whatever little criminal law came in, I got exposed to. And then I ended up working for another lawyer in town, a sole practitioner, and I was doing his remands, doing some review board hearings for people who have psychiatric issues or in a psychiatric hospital. Kind of, low-hanging fruit, basic litigation, nothing very complex or complicated. And I was kind of working for him on a piecemeal basis. I wasn't a formal employee, but I was just kind of what do they call it? Oh my God, when you independent contractor.
Mm-hmm.
So I technically was an independent contractor because I wasn't He didn't provide me with office space. He didn't really have an office. He was working out of his home. So he didn't provide me with office space, no benefits, and I just got paid piecemeal, and I would render my invoices and I get paid. And then I got a client on my own. And I remember speaking to him saying, look, this client called me. He goes, okay, it's yours. You take it. You do what you want with it. And then I thought, well, why would I work for him when I can get my own? And I'm getting a cut of it. But, you realize that when you set it up, I eventually set up a formal office, and we got a very good setup here. Very nice office space. We got a good infrastructure, a lot of technology assistance. So it's not a mom and pop shop. So when I set that up, and there's a lot of risk and there's a lot of headache and a lot of admin work that goes beyond just practicing law. When people say to me, what do you like best about it? I mean, I really like running the firm and I like the administrative part. But practicing law and getting in the courtroom and advising clients and dealing with the legal aspect of my practice, I probably spend 30%, 30 or 35, certainly a minority of my time on actually practicing law compared to managing the firm. So, if someone's going to do that, and I always tell people, if you're going to go out on your own and start your business, right? Anybody who started a business, the growing pains and the sweat and equity that goes into it. It's not just setting up shop and everything happens. It's setting up shop and making everything happen. So when when you got the added responsibility and duties of being a lawyer and running a law practicing and managing files, the difficult part in managing the firm and doing the business part of the operation becomes very involved, very taxing, very involved, and uh, very difficult, right? I'm very much sometimes on the phone with the bank, with the tax man, my accountant, payroll, staffing issues. Now with IT, computers going down or working too slow or not working at all. So you got to be aware of everything that's involved.
Yeah, no, that's good. Because there is a section that I was going to ask you about that, but that's very helpful. So then again, as far as bringing people into your practice, like what's your criteria? So it's like if you want to be part of this firm, you need to have these two, three, four, whatever the number of things are. What's your criteria?
That's another great question. I'm going to tell you something. When a lot of firms hire an individual, they look at the paper, right? What is that person like on paper? What are their marks? What are their grades? How was their school? What school do they go to? What courses they take? How do they do? They look at any extracurricular activities. Have they done a lot of volunteer work, charitable work? Or they sit on boards? And then they meet with them. They see just how smart they are, how articulate they are, how personable they are. That's all very important. But for me, the number one priority, and especially as if you want to work as a criminal defense lawyer, I really sense out if somebody really wants to do it. There's a difference when a candidate comes to me to be to look for a job as opposed to wanting to be a criminal lawyer. Huge difference. I can tell in a second if someone's just looking for a job as opposed to somebody who's looking to be a criminal defense lawyer.
Yeah, and I could see that. It's really interesting. Is my wife is a gigantic fan of Dateline and those show. I think if yeah, I put Sports Center on and those types of things. If I walk downstairs, there is some form, and we constantly sit there and we will go like, well, yeah, it's evident that this person is guilty or whatever it is, and then many times the defense lawyer comes in and they are poking at something, and then I sit there and go, geez. Now I'm not sure. it's just it's got to be extremely interesting. I want to feel like it's very difficult to start out with, in the sense of you have the more difficult job, is the way I see it, is in kind of proving the innocence, versus the other way around. So I don't know what the perspectives on that. Just maybe the question is, it's got to be difficult. Is a statement sort of question.
Well, yeah, I mean that's part of the challenge, right? We just got to raise a doubt. We don't really have to prove anything. We got to raise a doubt, which if you look at it from that perspective, you say, well, it's pretty easy. Crown attorney or the prosecutor has to prove everything beyond a reasonable doubt, really high threshold, whereas we only have to raise a teeny doubt. So if you look at it from that perspective, it's real advantage to an accused person. But if you look at the resources of the government, of the state, that's prosecuting, right? For the most part, they are much more handsomely resourced and able to do the job when you got police, prosecutors, investigators, any branch of the government against an accused person. It's very often an unfair fight from that perspective. 5 or 6 people against one, or against one and the lawyers too. So, very tough job. And I always say, um, our job is very difficult, much more difficult than a dentist or a doctor. Doesn't mean you have to be smarter. I'm not saying that, but think about the dentist. When the dentist receives his patient, he's there, the patient is compliant, sits there with their mouth open, and he's got he's got a dental assistant who trying to help them get the tooth, and everybody in the room, the hygienist, the assistant, the dentist, their goal is to get the tooth, and the patient really doesn't interfere unless they keep their mouth shut and they don't open their mouth properly. But think about a lawyer in the courtroom. Nobody's there to help me. I got my client, maybe an assistant, but I got the other side actively trying to make me fail. There's nobody in that dental room who's trying to keep that tooth in or make the tooth uh, rotten or stop the dentist from pulling that tooth. But I got crown attorneys or prosecutors, I got police officers, I've got a judge who often doesn't really care that much, is more neutral, if anything, trying to see that Bruce Engel loses. So that's why it's difficult, right? I mean, the only comparison is pro sports, right? You get pro sports, you get an athlete with teammates who are helping him, and another set of opponents who are trying to make him fail. So that's probably the
Yeah.
most apt comparison. But it's and very often you say, well, yeah, you got your client to help you, and I go, no, very often the client doesn't help. The client does everything to shoot themselves in the foot that doesn't help. So it's an interesting way of looking at it and an interesting existence.
And that's yeah, and so maybe just because I don't know that this is, I mean, do do you turn people away? Like,
I probably should turn more away. I should, mete out those that are difficult. But I don't really care about the type of charge. I don't care about how heinous the offense sounds, whether it's child pornography or child molestation or rape. The difficulty I have is the clients with unreasonable expectations, right? Clients who come in and say, I want these charges withdrawn next week. And number one, it's not my choice. Number two, it's not going to happen at breakneck speed. So you got, unreasonable expectations, something that might happen, probably won't, and certainly within a timeline that's completely unreasonable. So those individuals who are difficult, I'm in the middle of one where I have a client who's emailing me very long-winded emails 5, 6 times a day.
wow.
And I'd say, look, you want to send those to me? I got to read them. I'm going to bill you. Well, no, it's too expensive. And if I showed you the emails, 90% of them are completely irrelevant and have nothing to do with the case. So that's what's difficult. The difficult client, the difficult expectations, the unreasonable expectations. But by and large, and for the most part, you get people who are scared and trusting and ready to work with you and respect our abilities and the scope of what we can and can't do. But that's the way that's what I look at. I'm not, I don't turn someone away because they've done an act that is distasteful for me. Firstly, they're presumed innocent, so they haven't really done the act just yet. So they're entitled to that presumption. They're entitled to the benefit of that presumption, and they're entitled to help from a lawyer like me, whether or not it's the most awful accusation. They still are entitled to that assistance. But it's the problem I have is the expectations, the individual that just you can't work with.
Well, that's I'm sure you've used this before because I know I have. Is that's the hey, I'd like a Ferrari in my driveway too, but that's very unexpected. So yeah, I mean, let's be realistic now as to what might and could happen, and kind of then talking through the. I mean, going back to your preparation for trial and those types of things. I you talked about doing articles. I was an accountant by study and did articles for an accounting firm, so I'm familiar with that. And we had a degree of precision that was required, but I got to believe that your precision and attention to detail has got to be second to none. You can't leave any stone unturned, or just anything to chance, and then that's got to be quite overwhelming as far as trying to get to that point.
You know what's really good and fun and interesting about this job is what makes it so difficult and challenging, right? Every case is different.
Hmm.
So, I do a lot of frauds, sexual assaults, drunk driving. You know, for the most part, it's an individual accused of some sexual act, an individual who's driven with too much alcohol in their body. But each case is looked at and resolved and evaluated very differently. Certain issues arises, certain issues arise in certain cases that don't arise in others. So that's what's interesting and challenging about it, right? Because it's not it's not cooking a burger at McDonald's, right? You put the meat down, put it on for 4.5 minutes, and it's ready every time.
Yeah.
So it's very different, and and you add into the mix, right? The personality of the accused, the personality of the crown attorney, even the judge, right? I had a very senior lawyer years ago when we were acting for a co-accused. It was an assault trial. And we're walking over to the courthouse, and my client said, "What do you think our chances are?" And the co-counsel was very senior at the time. This is going back 15, 20 years ago. He was very senior. He said, "I'll let you know when I find out who the judge is." So that's right. You know what you can do and how far you can get with one judge, and you may not get as far and may not be able to do too much with another judge. So all that stuff makes it really interesting, makes it difficult, and very hard to predict. I always get individuals and clients who come up to me and say, "What do you think's going to happen?" I always say it's so hard to predict. I'll tell you what I think, but I always say once I get everything I need to know, once I know exactly what the evidence is, what the Crown position is, what the witnesses look like and sound like on the witness stand, not what their statement reads like. And once I get a sense of how you will do, then I can predict what I think. But even then, you're not always right, right? Certain judges seize on certain issues that others don't, and vice versa. So it's not an exact science, unlike accounting, which is got general accounting principles that you follow. But there's a bit of art to it. It's just making it all work, applying the basic long-standing winnable strategies that work. They're time-tested strategies that often have succeeded, but you gotta apply it and make it work for your set of circumstances, which may be different from the last case you had, even though it's the same type of charge.
Yeah, no, I could see that. That makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like a weird question, but just how do people find you? How do you acquire new clients? Do you advertise? Are you word of mouth? How's it typically happen?
Yeah, I'm big on advertising, and now probably now I've got more um, word of mouth because I've been doing this like 30 years. But I was big on advertising, and I still believe in it. And I'll tell you a funny story. When the internet happened and opened up with Google, I got a call from Yellow Pages and said, Bruce, you may want to take this online. Our book will be um, redundant in a couple of years. And I said, yeah, this is going back to the mid '90s,
Yeah.
maybe late '90s. And I said, yeah, I think you're right. And I eventually advertised online. And when you Googled Ottawa criminal lawyer, my name was the first five or six. I was the only guy up there, and I was getting calls. And I knew, I said, this is too good to be true. I know at some point everybody's going to catch up. Everybody's going to get wise to it. But it shocks me how little advertising a lot of lawyers do. Right? I believe in advertising, having a good professional looking website, and being accessible. But there's some lawyers I know, some friends of mine who are very good lawyers, very smart guys, don't even have a website, which it just shocks me, right? And they just don't see the big picture.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's doing it 30 years. I've got a lot of repeat business, word of mouth, that sort of thing. But I still get a lot of calls. I get a lot of cold calls online, and it's very different now than it was even 7, 8 years ago, where now people, it's all on the phone, right? Everybody does their research on the phone. Very few people go to their desktop. So it's got to be mobile friendly. You got to get the phone to be mobile friendly. And, you know, there's no real intricate search phrase, right? They're just saying Ottawa criminal lawyer. They're not saying white collar defense attorney, right? They're saying Ottawa criminal lawyer, and you got to be the first name that pops up. The downside with that is you get all these tire kickers and people who aren't really serious and people who are just making phone calls and can't afford to retain a lawyer. So that's a downside of it. But for the most part, you get a call and very often it pans
S-
out.
Some free consulting. Yeah. Right. So,
Yeah.
so it's, kind of going to a couple of questions here, and you talked a little earlier about being the accountant and the IT person and the whatever it is, and knowing that everywhere you turn right now is artificial intelligence. And has that has that made its way into your business yet, or even into the industry that you're aware of, that what people might be doing to automate some?
It,
I
it
can
is.
sense that there's going to be things that will be, it's going to be hard to do it, but there could be some mundane day-to-day stuff. Is that what have you guys seen?
It is, and we just got an email. There's a program about how to integrate AI into your practice and the pitfalls, and there's a directive from the court that you got to be careful if you're going to use AI. It's got to be accurate. But I will tell you something. About a month ago, maybe more than a month ago, I left a memo to my staff, to my paralegal, my assistant, the ones who deal with all the technology stuff. I said, you know what, guys, this AI, I think, is the next big thing. We should probably think about ways in which we can rely on it and help integrate it into our practice and make things easier. And they contacted our IT office, our IT personnel. We don't have it in house. We outsource it. So they contacted the IT office, and we're in the middle of trying to work through it. So I've got a couple of things, little by little, and it's baby steps. It's not just one giant program that's integrated and here you go. Like anything, you move slowly. So, it's an interesting question. We are looking into that. We're trying to figure out, and I'm still trying to figure out, is this is this something that will be useful to a guy like me, or is it maybe a bit overrated, right? A bit
Yeah, I
overrated.
think it's a very fair comment. I mean, I think the short answer is, in the long term, it's going to be helpful for particular things. It's that repetitive stuff. It's the, can I save 10 hours a week in, even potentially, and I'm trying to think through when you talked about the customer emailing you you could have some thing respond to it in a very professional and organized way, and then saving some time for that. But I've got to imagine that there's other very, very specific,
Yeah, I mean, you got to read it.
more,
You
yeah.
still got to read that stuff. So there's only so much you can do. But when when the internet happened, I remember thinking, I go, oh, this is a game changer. This is big stuff, right? This is like, I remember when I was a kid and I said to my dad in the 1970s with computers, I go, what is the big deal about a computer? What could a computer do? He goes, well, one day, Bruce, you'll be able to do your banking and pay your bills on a computer. And my dad had the foresight. My dad knows nothing about this now, but he had the foresight in the 1970s to say that. I remember thinking, okay, I don't know how that's going to happen. And then, of course, the internet came around, like what, 30 years later, 40 years later, I'm doing banking and paying bills online. I'm going, so this is
Yeah.
what he was talking about. And so that was a game changer, right? Online, and then, away went yellow pages, and away went um, old fashioned ways of doing things. And, the typewriter. When I started practicing, I had a typewriter on my desk. I had a typewriter with a ribbon
Yeah.
on a
My wife,
fax.
yeah, my wife and I worked at an accounting firm. She was the typist for the, and then we'd have to read to each other across the table to check the accuracy of what was handwritten to what was typed. I was like, yep, that's going
So
back.
that's insanity if you think about it, right? So
Yeah.
along came the internet, which you knew was a game changer. Then along came cell phones, right? Cell phones, another game changer. And now AI, I guess, is that a game changer? I guess it will be, but you know, cell phones, you figure out, internet, yeah, you're doing everything online. It's a lot more convenient, it's a lot more efficient. You don't have to write things out anymore, although I still write things out, but you don't have to. A cell phone, it's basically a portable computer, right? Portable computer, and you can call from your car. And I remember, you can take call. You don't have to be home to take a phone call. You don't have to be in your office to take a phone call. So AI, you know, AI, how is that? It just doesn't seem really obvious to me, right? When I looked at AI, I said, okay, AI is just basically almost like a search engine. It's just consolidating all the key search parts and presenting them to you. I know that things are being created. My son who's in his 30s and my daughters, they're in their early 30s. They're going to grow up with it. My grandkids who are
Mhm.
ages 1 to 6 are going to grow up with this and not know any better. But I'm not quite sure how it's going to make life easier for a criminal lawyer. I know it's going to make life easier for a movie producer, right? They may not have to hire actors, right? You may
Yeah.
not have to hire an actor. You may be able to create the perfect actor or actress and feed them the lines and create that. You don't have to pay a guy half the budget of a movie anymore. Um, so I get that, but I'm not sure, and especially from a relatively old-fashioned guy, I'm not sure how it's going to make a criminal lawyer like life for a criminal lawyer like myself much easier.
Yeah, no, I could see that, and I think, I mean, like I said, it's some of the day to day mundane things, but I could imagine, based on your comment earlier about every case needs to start afresh with a fresh perspective. Essentially, AI is the opposite of that. It's like going,
Exactly.
yes.
That's the problem. Bingo, bingo. Yeah.
So, hey, with a couple of minutes left, and really appreciate the time. So, you touched on this earlier too about starting a business and some of the key factors in hiring people. But if somebody was, let's just say, a new young person coming out of law school and said, "Hey, I want to start a practice," what's your advice to them?
You got to love what you do. I really love what I do. 30 years later, I still love it. Sometimes it drives me nuts, and that's why I don't have a lot of hair. And you're, you're right with me. Um, so there's headaches, and it's not all fun and games. So number one, you got to love what you do. It goes back to, are you looking for a career or a job? Right? You're looking for a job. You got to live this. And I'll never forget. I watch a lot of documentaries. Dateline's one of my favorite shows, as you mentioned earlier. I was watching a documentary, and there's a lawyer in the States down south, I think somewhere in South Carolina, and he was saying, criminal lawyer, you're always on. It's never off. You got to always answer that phone. You got to always be ready for a problem. You got to always have your lawyer hat on. You may be in a t-shirt and shorts and relaxing on the beach, but the call may come in and you got to hop to it. Maybe response. You're always on. So criminal defense, you're always on, and you're never off the clock. I had a politician, a friend of a friend who's a politician, and I remember saying to him, I go, you can go really far. And I was talking to him, and his wife said, leave him alone. He's off the clock. I said, you're off the clock. You want to run? You want to run the country, and you want to be. I don't want a guy who's off the clock running the country. And my clients don't necessarily want a lawyer who's going to run their firm off the clock. Certainly we're entitled to be off the clock at certain points, but there's being off the clock and there's being off the clock. When the client calls at 9 o'clock at night, I may not be able to answer him because I'm maybe taking a shower or on the ice. I play a lot of hockey, but at some point you got to call back and you got to get on the clock. So you can't take 4-week vacations and not check in your emails or your phone. So you got to love what you do. And you know, what I did myself, what's that great Nike slogan? Just do it, right? Just do it. Just put your head down. Don't start planning. Don't start having business proposals. If you think about it, you're going to scare yourself to death and you're going to think of a million reasons why you shouldn't. So that great Nike logo, just do it, right? The slogan, just do it. Just put your head down and do it.
I love that. And I tell you what, it took me, I'm 58 years old, and I started this business 2 months ago because my boss was pissing me off. And I just said, I'm done and I'm just going to do it. Here I am. You're never too old. So people who are watching this, it's not only that you're never too old to get going.
Well, I have my own podcast. It's called Presumption of Nonsense. We have about 8 episodes. We're just too busy. We haven't been able to get past episode 8. We haven't done one in a few months. But when I was talking about it with my office, I said, let's just put a podcast together. And I go, no, no, no. Yours is really slick and well produced. I said, no, let's just punk rock, right? Just punk rock, basic, no pre-production, no rehearsal. Let's just get out there and talk, right? The great thing about punk rock was anybody could go out and make a record. You didn't have to have fancy production and great instrumentalists. Just go out and do it. And very often the product is more raw, but sometimes better. It's more real. So yeah, just do it. Don't think it too much. There's got to be some degree of planning and preparation for sure, but don't paralyze yourself with overly preparing. Just go out and do it and don't think too much. Got to think a little, but not too much.
No, and I appreciate that. So this was very, very enlightening. I appreciate the time. I'm going to push the stop button.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.